Hello. This is chapter 3, and this chapter introduces a new sort of segment in the book where they talk about what your authors call deep structure of a culture. And there are three fundamental aspects of deep structure, and the first of which is family, and that's the topic of the conversation in this chapter. Some of the other things discussed in the chapter. Obviously, it's going to talk about this idea of what the social institutions are that comprise deep structure, the family's influence on structure, and then some different cultural variants within culture. As I typically do in these PowerPoint reviews, I'm going to go relatively quickly, knowing that you can stop and rewind as you have need. So first we're going to start off by the discussion of deep structure. And deep structure is both conscious and unconscious, as you can read. And it is the core of what unifies a lot of the collective cultural behavior within that particular group. It answers a lot of universal questions that a people might have, things like what's the meaning of death, how important is family, what determines morality or right and wrong. Those fundamental issues are often answered by deep structure. So here you see influence. This different institutions covered as deep structure are family, state or history, and religion. So then your book begins to talk about why deep structure is so important, and it explores some fundamental reasons why we need to look at these. So you can see them here, that they carry a culture's most important messages, messages that last, messages that people feel very deeply, and messages that deal with your personal identity and comprise your self-concept and who you are. So now we dive into the first one, which is family. Family is the oldest of all human institutions. It's the most fundamental, most basic unit of society and is very obviously universal and present in all cultures. Here the definition of a family is given to you, and you can read that later. It's straight from the text. Different forms of families. There are different ways to categorize family. This is simply one approach. The idea of a nuclear family versus a extended family basically has to do with whether you're looking at it on a small scale or on a large scale. In most individualistic cultures, it's going to be more of a nuclear family, which is that parent-child two-generation, and tends to be pretty common. Extended family, much more typical in collectivistic cultures, includes aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and so on and so forth, oftentimes living under the same roof. There's a lot more communal sharing of responsibilities, both for taking care of the older and taking care of the younger. Different alternative forms. Another way to look at family is the family of orientation and the family of procreation. Family of orientation is the one that you are born into. Family of procreation is the one that you then create. So certainly in the United States, there are many different societal changes that have influenced the alteration of family within this particular country where obviously your authors reside. So certain economic changes that are have been discussed in your book, certain social changes, economics, technology, demographics, gender roles. There are certain new family types within the U.S. Certainly you have your traditional married families. There are many parents who were raised in many children who were raised in single parent households. You can have family, a heterosexual couple lives together but never married, and then of course you can have your homosexual family and people who've adopted. The variety of types of families that exist is many and is changing. Globalization has an impact on family, both in terms of migration, people moving for different economic reasons to different parts of the country or for jobs or whatever, as well as mass media having an influence in shaping the perception of family and determining what is defined as normal or what is defined as functional or dysfunctional. In terms of functions of the family, there are some relatively universal functions of the family. First is reproduction, obviously the children. Economic families in terms of providing. Socialization, families are where the basic social norms are taught and expected. And of course, your identity, who you are. Communication, culture, and family, how do these three intertwine? Notice this paragraph here. Family is both a product of communication and is both the context in which communication takes place. So it's both an output and then it's an environment. It's critical to how communication takes place, has a tremendous influence on how people communicate in terms of how they were taught within their family. Then we get into other different variables such as gender, and here you can see a simple slide that illuminates some of the cultural variations within families in different countries. Again, discuss more in terms of Western and so on and so forth. When you tie in the specific notions, some of these that we talked about last week that now you're very familiar with, is the idea of individualism and collectivism. So certainly you're going to find some of this familiar to you because we've already covered it in depth in Chapter 6. Here's the connection to family in terms of emphasis on individualism or collectivism in terms of the role. This last one here, that the child is encouraged to think for themselves, is something that in the United States we take very much for granted, that a child can decide what he wants to wear or she wants to wear to school that day. In many cultures, that remains the responsibility of the parent for many, many years. And the child doesn't do something as fundamental as that until they are older. So what we consider normal and typical, what is common to us in the United States, is not necessarily common around the world. It's good to be reminded of that. Collectivism, so obviously interdependence, the fact that the idea of honor, that you do well in school because it brings honor to your family, and that when you do poorly in anything, you bring shame to the family or dishonor. And so it's all about maintaining and putting the family before yourself. Other things, another cultural variant within family is the emphasis and the respect for the elderly, and this varies dramatically in different countries, as you can see. Social skills, how you communicate, what we teach our children. I can remember when my boys were little that we had little role plays, small skits of how to greet people. If mom and dad had somebody over to the house for dinner, how do you greet them? How do you open the door? What do you say? What do you do? Obviously 2 boys, we spent a lot of emphasis on handshakes. And when they both went on their first date, it was a lot of discussion about how you treat your dates. That's all part of those social skills that a family can perpetuate. And here are some other topics that are mentioned. Aggression, you'll find that probably on the playground and on the sports field, athletic field, more than any other place. And you, no doubt, have seen families on either ends in terms of how much they encourage their son or daughter to be aggressive in an athletic sport. And decision making we've already talked about. So there we go, we've done that. So that is Chapter 3, Family, and have a great week.